All right, let's see if this time it works. I don't know if it will. Thank you for joining me. I'm David Feldman, and I have a sneaking suspicion it's not working. It doesn't. Oh, it is working. Okay. I want to thank members of my community here on YouTube. We were supposed to start on Sunday night at 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and there were technical problems, and then we tried it again, and you all stuck with me, and you got me through this. You are the wind beneath my gonads, and I can't thank you enough. All right, this is the mop-up. I think this is the mop-up. We're going to do this show. Hasn't been easy. Okay. I want to be careful here because Donald Trump is a pathological liar. He tries to control news cycles like King Canute pretended to control the tides. But here's the thing about King Canute. He pretended he was trying to control the tides in order to prove he was powerless before God. Trump, on the other hand, really wants to control the seas, specifically the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's fertilizer must pass. Now, we all know he's become powerless after Iran did the thinkable and closed Hormuz, right? And now he doesn't know what to do. He put together his own armada, and he's blockading the strait himself. The problem with that is the world is starving, choking, and suffocating, and he's got to do something. He's got to do something. He can't negotiate with Iran. Iran just made a legitimate offer, which I'll go over later. It's basically, we'll open up Hormuz if you end the blockade. We'll talk for 30 days, and let's just put nuclear weapons and nuclear enrichment on the back burner. This is what Iran is saying tonight. Let's get Hormuz open. Maybe we won't enrich uranium for another 5 years, but let's start talking. And he doesn't want to talk to Iran because he knows he will never get the deal Obama got. Again, I want to be careful here because I'm going to start talking about something that Trump said late Sunday evening. He says a lot of things, right? So this may not be true. He says it's not a war, it's a war, but we want it, we're winning, but we're going to stop winning and take a break from winning because we're tired of winning, but soon we're going to start bombing again because we're going to start winning again. This is what he said tonight. He announced that the United States Navy would begin guiding ships stranded in the Persian Gulf safely through the Strait of Hormuz. That was his announcement. Iran offered a 14-point peace deal, which I'll get to in a second. No response from Donald Trump. Instead, he's now claiming he's going to start escorting the 20,000 some odd ships and tankers stranded in the Persian Gulf as a humanitarian gesture. He's trying to provoke an incident. Maybe he's trying to do this. And he said, so this is what he said. He's calling this a humanitarian gesture. He said, and I quote, "The ship movement is merely meant to free up people, companies, and countries that have done absolutely nothing wrong." He said, quote, "They are victims of circumstance." No, not circumstance. They're victims of Donald Trump's stupidity. That's what they're victims of. That's all he said. And the White House has issued no clarifications. We should know tomorrow, Monday morning, supposedly. Congress doesn't get back until 10 days from now with the War Powers authorization 3 days late. We're supposed to have a war authorization from Congress before he starts escorting ships, tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Trump says a lot of things. Sunday night, early Sunday night, U.S. Central Command, after Donald Trump made this announcement, U.S. Central Command, that would be CENTCOM. They control the Middle East theater of war. CENTCOM issued a statement that they are calling this Operation Freedom, adding, quote, "We're doing this to restore freedom of navigation for commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz," unquote. We have soldiers, families, and friends of soldiers who have been put in a constant state of anxiety because of announcements like these. One day, Trump's bombing Iran back to the Stone Ages. One day, Iran is begging him for peace. The next day, Iran says, "We never begged him for peace. We don't want peace." So he's a merchant of chaos, but you've got to report and talk about everything he says that's important, and this is important. It's important if it's true. It's also important if it's not true. Iran, this may be brinkmanship. Iran made a reasonable offer. We don't know that much about it, but we know it's not as good as what Obama made in 2015. So Trump said Sunday, and CENTCOM said Sunday, the operation begins early Monday morning. It may have already started. There's been a lid on what is really going on along the Strait of Hormuz. There have been reports of U.S. missile-guided destroyers sailing through Hormuz, searching for mines, and there have been no reports of Iran firing on those naval ships, American naval ships, supposedly going back and forth through the Strait of Hormuz. Is that true? Do we actually, can we confirm that we have been sweeping for mines in Hormuz? Trump and Hegseth say we have. We also know we've got about 45% of our active duty fleet in and around the Strait of Hormuz, in the Gulf of Oman, outside the Strait of Hormuz. We also know 3 aircraft carrier groups are in the immediate region. I don't know what's going on. I don't think U.S. ships are going to be escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz on Monday. I don't think they are. I also think if U.S. ships do begin escorting tankers, I have no idea. I don't think Iran will fire on them, because how much manpower, women power, firepower are we going to have to expend helping tankers pass through the Strait of Hormuz? They probably are playing the long game, will not fire on any naval ships in Hormuz, because it's going to cost us a fortune to help these tankers pass through Hormuz. Theoretically, our aircraft carriers could pass through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz is wide enough and deep enough, but why would you send an aircraft carrier through the Strait of Hormuz? If you're planning some kind of attack on Kharg Island, which produces 90% of Iran's oil, and that's in the Persian Gulf, you cannot rely solely on air support. Lindsey Graham wants ground troops. He wants to take Kharg Island. That's in the Persian Gulf. So in order to pull that off, we would have to send missile-guided destroyers through Hormuz. You cannot hold Kharg Island in the Persian Gulf without massive bombardment from naval ships. And those naval ships, as we know, become easy targets going through the strait or floating in the Persian Gulf. During the first Gulf War, That was George Herbert Walker Bush's war. We had 4 aircraft carriers sitting in the Persian Gulf. So they can pass through Hormuz and get into the Persian Gulf. I have no idea if Trump is lying, posturing, whether or not he got an, he's just trying to, I don't know what he's trying to do. I suspect he wants a war. That's what I suspect. He wants to be a wartime president because a wartime president gets to concentrate all the power into the Oval Office, and you can't criticize, he thinks you can't criticize a president during wartime. He's got Republicans already saying, defending Trump. I'm seeing Rick Scott was on CNN. I saw him saying, Iran can't be allowed to exert this kind of power over the world. We can't allow Iran to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That's a new talking point. There are 2 talking points. The new one is we can't allow Iran to do this to us by shutting down Hormuz. That's the new one. The other talking point, the loudest, is we can't allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Now, later in the show, I'm going to explain to you why that is not only a lie, but one of the stupidest things you can possibly say. We can't allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. I'm going to go over why that's a lie, and it's just an attempt to scare you into a war that Trump desperately needs. Now, the growing chorus that we're beginning to hear from Republicans is we cannot allow them to have this kind of power to shut down Hormuz. Well, they always had this kind of power. It's why Obama, Europe, China, Russia, the EU signed the Iran deal in 2015. And I'm going to go over that deal with you tonight to show you that Iran was sticking to the treaty and wasn't messing around with UN inspectors until Donald Trump pulled out. It wasn't Donald Trump pulled out, and then Iran in 2020, after it became apparent that this deal was dead, they began messing with UN inspectors. He wants a war. Going into Monday morning, here's what you need to ask, and here's what you need to pay attention to. Donald Trump and CENTCOM just said we would begin escorting ships out of the Persian Gulf through Hormuz. Are those operations taking place right now? It's already Monday morning in the Strait of Hormuz. Is it happening? And will Iran fire on American military vessels? I suspect they won't, because that would give Trump what he wants. What does he want? He wants, remember the Maine. He wants the Lusitania. Lyndon Johnson used an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin to get that war resolution. He got a blank check from Congress in 1964 to escalate in Vietnam. And he did. In August of 1964, the Maddox and then the Turner Joy were supposedly attacked by the North Vietnamese. The Maddox was probably attacked by the North Vietnamese. The Turner Joy was not. The Turner Joy had trouble because of weather. But a North Vietnamese torpedo boat, we're pretty certain, attacked the Maddox while the Maddox was in international waters, but a little too close off the coast of North Vietnam, collecting intelligence. And it didn't get sunk, but it was damaged by a North Vietnamese torpedo boat. And Johnson lied about the Turner Joy. He might have been telling the truth about the Maddox. We're pretty certain that it did get hit by a North Vietnamese torpedo boat. But what the hell was it doing off the coast of North Vietnam collecting intelligence during wartime? This was 1964. Yes, it was in international waters, so the North Vietnamese had no right to attack our ship. But Johnson used that. He needed an excuse. He needed the Lusitania. He needed, remember the hell with Spain, remember the Maine. That's what gets Americans into a war. So neither boat sunk. The Maddox, the Turner Joy didn't sink. But Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The Gulf of Tonkin is where the incident took place. And it served as the impetus for Lyndon Johnson to escalate in Vietnam. 3 million Americans passed through. We lost on the field of combat 47,000 men and women. In 1889, it was Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain. The Maine was sunk off the coast of Cuba. That was used to justify the Spanish-American War, and nobody is certain who was really responsible for the Maine getting blown up. A U-boat, a German U-boat, sunk the Lusitania in 1915. That was eventually used as one of the reasons Woodrow Wilson got us into World War I, and nobody knows who was on board the Lusitania and who actually sank it. So Trump, I don't know if we're going to be escorting, if supposedly right now, we're CENTCOM and Trump says we're escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz right now. All it takes, and Trump knows this, all it's going to take is one of our ships to get hit in the Strait of Hormuz, and Americans turn into jingoistic fools. Some, although fewer and fewer, we've wised up, but there are enough hawks looking for an excuse to send somebody else's kid into war. They will support ground troops going into Iran if one of our naval destroyers is hit. Now, they did hit our fighter jets, some Warthogs. They did hit Black Hawk helicopters right on Good Friday. But there's something about naval warfare that gets Americans going, because it's, well, anyway. If one of our ships gets hit, not sunk, just hit, Trump is probably going to use that as a way to trick Americans the way Lyndon Johnson tricked Americans, the way Woodrow Wilson and McKinley tricked Americans, pointing to a sunken ship or a damaged ship and saying, we got to go to war. Remember, commanders-in-chief like war. They like the power that comes with it. All right, this is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for joining me, and thank you to my listeners who watch this show on YouTube. This was not an easy day for me. We had serious technical problems, and you encouraged me to do this show. I was almost ready to call it an evening. Todd Blanche, our acting attorney general, was on Meet the Press on Sunday. You might recall on Tuesday, he indicted former FBI chief Jim Comey for posting a picture of seashells that spelled out 8647, meaning 86. I always thought it was throw somebody out of a bar. 47 being the 47th president of the United States. They're saying this was a threat to assassinate our commander-in-chief. And Todd Blanche was asked, well, are you going to start arresting everybody who goes to social media and writes 8647? And Todd Blanche said, no. Seashells are part of the case. He said that we will prove that Mr. Comey had intent to damage, to hurt Donald Trump. It wasn't just the seashells. Yeah, okay. All right. On today's show, Hormuz still remains shut. Donald Trump says he's not so sure he wants to end the blockade because he says Iran hasn't suffered enough. And I'm going to just, maybe he's lying, but he says, I'm going to help the ships pass through. Meanwhile, he's blockading Hormuz to punish Iran. And according to the White House, as well as a growing chorus of Republicans, paying 50% more for a gallon of gas is a small price to make sure Americans can help ExxonMobil book record profits. As peace talks between Iran and the United States appeared stalled, there was an offer on Sunday from the Iranians. I'll go over it later. Meanwhile, the Iranian parliament is about to pass legislation that would enshrine into law which ships are permitted to pass through Hormuz and which ones are not. This, as a spokesperson for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, warned on Sunday before Trump made this announcement. A spokesperson for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard warned that Trump is running out of time if he wants to make a peace deal with us, with the Iranians. They're saying, we've given you something, you better start making a deal with us. That spokesperson said, this is the Iranian, the Revolutionary Guard, they said there's only one way to read Donald Trump's erratic behavior. The spokesperson for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said Trump is in a corner. He must choose between an impossible military operation or a bad deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. The spokesperson for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard said the room for U.S. decision-making has narrowed. So they've been taunting Trump. And the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is speaking the truth to Trump. And we all know how much Donald Trump hates the truth. And they are just flaunting the fact that Donald Trump is in a corner. It is an impossible military decision for Donald Trump because the American people have said they would not support sending in troops to free up Hormuz. So Trump responded to this taunting by announcing, starting on Monday morning, we're going to escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know. I don't know if he is. I think he's ashamed of how powerless he is and how Iran is taunting him. Again, Trump has to make a deal. There is no military solution to this because you cannot use 4 or 5 aircraft carriers in the Gulf of Oman and 45% of our active duty naval fleet. That's what we got. Nearly half our Navy is outside the Strait of Hormuz. You're going to have half the Navy there protecting tankers and ships for how long? Iran will wait you out. They will wait you out. There's no military solution to this. Trump has to make a deal, but he can't because it will be far worse than the deal Barack negotiated with Iran back in 2015. Gas prices have pretty much doubled in some parts of the country since the war began. But on his way out of the White House, Trump told reporters why nobody should worry.
Well, now, gasoline's high. Other prices are way down, but gasoline's high. But when this is over, you'll have a world without a nuclear weapon with Iran. If you allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, the world would be in great jeopardy. So it's not going to happen. As soon as the war ends, the gasoline prices will
You're going down to the villages.
Yes, Trump is going down to the villages. Trump gave a speech on Friday at the Villages. That's a retirement community near his home, which should be his home. He belongs in the Villages. It's time to take away Grandpa's car keys. And he spoke to the people in the Villages, the senior citizens. Now, everything I just played you is a lie. All the stuff about we can't allow Iran to get a nuclear weapon. They discontinued their nuclear weapons program in 2003. I'm going to go over this later on. I'm going to show you what was in the 2015 deal that Barack Obama signed with Iran. I'm going to show you how they're just trying to scare you about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And he lies and says it's just oil prices that are going up. If oil prices go up, everything goes up. The price of condoms has gone up 30%. So here is the Donald Trump bragging. This is Donald Trump speaking to some old people at the Villages. They love him at the Villages. And he's talking about our great Navy and what a great job they're doing. And it sounds strong. He's talking about his blockade. Blockade is a good word. What he doesn't tell them is he's the one choking off the world's oil and fertilizer. But because he's doing that and not Iran, he thinks he sounds strong. And the idiots in the room agree with him.
When you look at the Hormuz Strait and you see all of those ships, all of those people and ships that they want to get out or they want to get in, they're all over the place. They're like little ants, right? They look like a little anthill. And hundreds and hundreds of ships. And we have a Navy that is unbelievable. We put up, it's a blockade.
It's a blockade.
It's a blockade.
We got a Navy and we're using it so you have to pay twice as much for gas and can't afford food. What a Navy, what a blockade. It is the dumbest military maneuver in the history of stupidity. Forget the military, just in the history of stupidity. And then he regaled his audience with the story of our Navy seizing an Iranian tanker named the Tuska. He couldn't wait to talk about our Marines, how they fired into the engine room, and how they seized all the contents inside the Iranian tanker. He said, we took over the cargo. We took their oil. He goes, it's a very profitable business. We're like pirates. That's what he said. Our soldiers are like pirates. That's how he describes our Navy and Marines. Pirates. Well, thanks to Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, they might as well call themselves pirates because they're being forced to obey orders right now that all legitimate nation states would never issue because they're against the law. This war, which is not a war, is now 3 days past its sell date. He's got to sell this, by law, he's got to sell this to Congress. Congress won't be back for 10 more days. Thanks to the War Powers Act, passed in 1973, Trump requires congressional approval, something he's not asking for because he says it's not a war. Here's Trump again explaining why Iran is not a war and only a military operation.
what they call a military operation. You know, they don't like the word war, and they call it a military operation because that way you don't have a war, you don't have legal problems.
At least he's being honest about his dishonesty. It's a war. 13 American soldiers dead, maybe 14, more than 300 wounded. You're looking at our embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, being destroyed. The Pentagon doesn't like to talk about that. That's where the CIA in Saudi Arabia had their offices. So when and if this war ever ends, we will see the incompetence and lack of preparedness demonstrated by Pete Hegseth and his flunkies inside the Pentagon. New reporting that Iran succeeded in doing billions and billions of dollars to 16 American military bases in 8 Persian Gulf states. Now, I've been telling you about this for about 3 weeks, and now more and more information is coming in. And the leaders of the Persian Gulf states are infuriated with Donald Trump because Iran keeps hitting them too. There's a ceasefire now, but before the ceasefire, Iran was hitting, they did billions of dollars in damages to 16 American military bases in 8 Persian Gulf states, and they're also hitting tankers and refineries and smelters in the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf leaders want to know why those interceptors, our military-industrial complex, sold to them, interceptors that go for $3 million a pop, why are they defenseless against swarms of drones and other forms of asymmetrical warfare? Also defenseless sometimes. I mean, they do knock out the majority, but all it takes is a couple to get through. So these $3 million defensive missiles, interceptors, cannot deal with asymmetrical warfare, drones, suicide drones, and they're having trouble with symmetrical warfare, old-fashioned warfare like ballistic missiles and jet fighters. Iranian jet fighters and ballistic missiles have pierced the defensive shield we sold these countries in the Persian Gulf, which is why right now they are turning away from us and towards Ukraine, looking to buy and invest in more reliable interceptors manufactured by Ukraine's military-industrial complex. You have Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf states now giving Zelensky money, investing in his factories that have become pretty destructive. And I'm going to go over that later on in the show. I'm going to show you what Zelensky has done to Moscow and Russia. Meanwhile, when the true story of this illegal war on Iran is finally told, you will learn how unprotected and vulnerable American soldiers stationed in the Gulf were, and how many aircraft, command centers, and radar installations have been destroyed by Iranian drones, missiles, and aircraft. We know about the $750 million AWACS that got destroyed on the tarmac at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. We know about the Warthog that got taken down, the jet fighter that got taken down. We know about the Black Hawk helicopters that got fired on and damaged and had to turn around. This has not been a success. And I urge you all to read the editorial in the New York Times from Friday, which outlines what I've been telling you for a month, that our military, as the New York Times said, has become sclerotic. The military-industrial complex is all about profits, but when it comes to keeping our soldiers safe in overseas wars, they don't know how to adapt because it's for profit. If it's only for profit, they're not going to think about our soldiers. They're going They're going to only think about the bottom line. Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth and the Republicans say it's unpatriotic for me to talk about stories like this. You're giving, said Hegseth during his testimony last week, aid and comfort to the enemy by telling the American people what the truth is. Pete Hegseth says you're feeding the Iranians information that they can use against our troops. It's really, he says, unpatriotic. Shame on you, is what he said to Democratic members of Congress last week and to the press during his briefing. Shame on you for asking that question. Whose side are you on? Don't you love America? Well, the Iranians already know how stupid and incompetent Pete Hegseth is. They don't need reporters, members of Congress, to tell them how unprepared Pete Hegseth was for this war. The Iranians, the enemy, picked up on this way before the idiots in Congress did. They knew Hegseth was stupid and arrogant, unqualified, and would put our soldiers in harm's way. So it's not telling the truth that's unpatriotic. It's not reporting the truth that puts soldiers in harm's way. The truth is Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump, Marco Rubio put our soldiers in harm's way. The truth is Pete Hegseth is the traitor. Pete Hegseth hates America. He blows his nose into an American flag handkerchief, and he sees our troops as toys to be used in his psychotic clash of civilizations, a clash he's been itching for between Christianity and Islam. Pete Hegseth hides behind the troops and the flag and our country and patriotism when, in fact, he hates our troops. He puts them in harm's way without the preparedness they deserve. He has them in shelters in Kuwait, susceptible to we lost 6 soldiers in Kuwait because he put them in the wrong barracks. No medics, no ambulances. He hates our troops. He hates America. He doesn't love our country. If he did, he'd obey the Constitution. He would respect checks and balances, freedom of the press, and he would obey the 1996 War Crimes Act, signed into law by Bill Clinton. He is, by the very definition of a war criminal, a war criminal. Read the War Crimes Act of 1996, what he did and is doing in the Caribbean, the Eastern Pacific, the bombing strikes on that Ethiopian refugee camp in Yemen, what he's doing in Iran. These are war crimes, not according to The Hague, not according to the International Criminal Court, which we're not signatories to. I love the way Democratic politicians say, yes, these are war crimes, but what can we do? We're not signatories to the International Criminal Court. You have the War Crimes Act of 1996. Read it and enforce it. He's a war criminal. I don't want any harm to come to him or his family. I don't want anything violent. I just want the laws enforced. I'm all about law and order. And he's a war criminal by the very definition. Read the War Crimes Act of 1996, which enshrined the punishments for violating the Geneva Conventions of 1949. I think it's 1949. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 were already on the books for our soldiers, starting in 1949. They had to obey the Geneva Conventions. The War Crimes Act of 1996 enshrines the punishments for American soldiers and leaders who violate the Geneva Conventions of 1949. Now, if one of your war crimes results in more than one person dying, that is punishable by execution, according to the War Crimes Act of 1969. And there's no statute of limitations. So Hegseth is 45 years old. If and when this country ever goes back to obeying our laws, he will be hunted down like de Munich, like Eichmann. He is a war criminal. So, besides being a war criminal and hating America, being unpatriotic, being a fake Christian who doesn't worship Jesus, he worships Pastor Doug Wilson, who cherry picks the Old Testament to find reasons to oppress women, Muslims, and the LGBTQ community. He does not believe in democracy. He does not believe all people are created equal. He doesn't. He hates America. He hates what our founding fathers stood for. Although Pete Hegseth and Doug Wilson, they love the old Confederacy because that was a Christian nation. Doug Wilson, Pastor Doug, that would be Pete Hegseth's Pope, says, slavery wasn't that bad. There was mutual affection between the slaves and the slaveholders, and the Confederacy was a Christian nation. Pete Hegseth hates America. When you rename Fort Liberty Fort Bragg in order to honor a psychotic genocidal maniac, General Bragg, who, by the way, was a bad general. He's one of the reasons the Confederacy lost. When you do that, you signal you hate America. The fact that he has to wear an American flag handkerchief in his breast pocket should tell you everything. Anybody who claims they love America is like the guy who says, I'm not gay. I'm not gay. I hate gays. How could I be gay if I hate gays? This man hates America. If you have to tell people you love the country, you hate it. And he hates it. Read about the church he belongs to, the community he belongs to, that has its own Christian version of Sharia law. I've told you this, and I will keep telling you this. Donald Trump is the most dangerous man in America. Pete Hegseth, covered in neo-Nazi tattoos, is the second most dangerous man in America. And we have laws right now on the books to arrest him for war crimes. Again, I don't want any harm, physical harm, to come to him or his family. I just want laws enforced. That's all I'm asking for. Now, we are running on fumes with this war, or whatever it is, and it's going to take 3 to 5 years to replace all the missiles and interceptors we used up. Problem with our military-industrial complex is they're not loyal. They have other customers. So our military has to wait in line. We funnel all this money to Raytheon or whatever their name is now, and Boeing and Lockheed Martin. But when we need the weapons, I'm sorry, got to go to the back of the line. We got South Korea, we got Israel, we got the Persian Gulf. You're just one of our customers, America. So it's going to take 3 to 5 years to replace all the missiles and interceptors we used up. And that's considered unpatriotic. To tell you how unpatriotic the military-industrial complex is here in the United States. We're at war, supposedly, and the manufacturers of Tomahawks, they're going, oh, we got other customers. We got other customers. But it's unpatriotic to tell you this. It's unpatriotic to tell you how unpatriotic Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin are, and how unpatriotic the generals who go and become lobbyists and spokespeople for these weapons manufacturers are. It's unpatriotic to tell you how unpatriotic Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are. So who's to blame? Why are we short missiles? This was something, by the way, that J.D. Vance was saying during the 2024 presidential elections. He was the one, because they're all part of the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, and they're saying, no, maybe we should help Ukraine. J.D. Vance said, but we don't have the munitions to help Ukraine. Our military-industrial complex, despite America spending $1 trillion a year, we don't have the capacity to arm Ukraine. So we shouldn't pass that war supplemental for Ukraine. And now, on Capitol Hill and before members of the press, when members of the press and members of Congress ask, why are we depleted? Why are we running out of munitions? Hegseth lies and blames Zelensky. He blames Ukraine. He lies and says, we gave Ukraine hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of our weapons to Ukraine. That's why our stockpiles are low. And by the way, the stockpiles are not low. We have an unlimited supply. Our stockpiles are not low, but they are low because we gave hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of our weapons to Ukraine. That's a lie. That is just a lie. We gave Ukraine $61 billion in cash in 2024. That was the supplemental that Biden passed, that Mike Johnson took his sweet time on. And the deal is they used that $61 billion to buy weapons from our military-industrial complex. Remember, Joe Biden was traveling around the country trying to sell this war supplemental for Ukraine, saying, hey, it's a jobs bill. And he would visit missile plants in Alabama and say, hey, we're creating jobs by giving $61 billion to Ukraine so they buy our weapons. It was just $61 billion. That was 2024. It wasn't hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars worth of our stockpiles. Hegseth and Trump were warned before they launched this war on February 28th. You can't do this. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Radcliffe, the head of the CIA, they all said, don't listen to Netanyahu. You can't do this. You can't do it alone. We don't have enough munitions. We need allies. But Pete Hegseth, whose body is littered with neo-Nazi tattoos that evoke the Crusades because it was all about killing Muslims, Deus Vult is all about killing Muslims, he wanted to kill Muslims. And Donald Trump doesn't want to leave the White House, and he thinks, the added benefit of my getting hard killing people is it'll be harder for them to remove me from the Oval Office if we're a nation at war. I could probably invoke the Insurrection Act. So they wanted their war. Everybody else in the White House didn't. And everybody else in the White House is leaking. Everybody else is leaking to save their asses. Everybody's leaking on Hegseth and Trump. And we know from people leaking in the Pentagon that America has depleted 50% of our Patriot defense missiles, 50% of our THAAD missile defense system. Those are the batteries that shoot way up high into the sky. And we've gone through 45% of our entire stockpile of precision missiles. That's what dropping 13,000 bombs on Iran in about 4 weeks did to our stockpile of weapons. You would think, since we have all these aircraft carriers around the world, that we could just keep bombing countries. I mean, what have we been buying? Apparently not enough. Apparently we can only bomb somebody back to the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Can't do it. Can't. We were promised we could bomb countries back to the Stone Ages. If we're lucky, we can get them back to right before the Industrial Revolution. But Trump, over the weekend, does what he does best. He lies. And he tells reporters, oh, no, we have plenty of interceptors and missiles. In fact, Trump lied. We have more interceptors and missiles today than before the war started on February 28th. Donald Trump lied and said, we've doubled the number of munitions in the past 60 days. He just lies. He just lies. And then after he told that lie, he warned anyone who says America hasn't won the war against Iran that is not a war. Anybody who says we haven't defeated Iran, quote, is guilty of treason. The commander-in-chief of the United States saying it's treasonous to tell the truth. Well, they always say the first casualty of war is the truth. That's not true. It's usually a civilian or people on a boat, a couple of soldiers. Then they start lying about it. So the first casualty of war is not the truth. Donald Trump said anybody who criticizes this war is unpatriotic. Well, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said, and I quote, I'm going to keep it clean, BS. He said the actual word. Schumer said that's BS. This is an illegal war and it's not unpatriotic to say it. Schumer said the entire Republican Party, and this is true. I'm no fan of Schumer's, but he's right. The entire Republican Party is complicit in this war's illegality. And he added, all this while the American people are footing the bill. That's right. You're paying for this. Jeff Bezos isn't paying for this. He's buying the Met Gala. He's not paying taxes. He's buying the Met Gala. Schumer said Trump is draining the pockets of ordinary Americans. When has Trump never done that? And Americans know this. Americans know this. There's new polling from the Washington Post and CNN. The Economist, 44% of Americans right now say they are driving less since this war began because gas, on average, has jumped nearly 50%. Depends on where you live. It's doubled in some states. 42% of Americans say they are forced to choose between rent, food, and gas as the cost of a barrel of crude oil is now settling in at around $112 a barrel. Most Americans before the war were forced to choose between rent, food, gas, health care. Now it's just gotten worse. Now it's just gotten so depressing that people have stopped paying attention to it. That's how Trump wins, if we allow it. It's just getting so horrible, the Americans are lied to and are convinced everybody else is doing fine. It's just you. And people just get depressed. You can either be depressed or you can be angry. If you're depressed, get angry. Don't get violent. Don't make threats. Do what my sister does. Get out there and protest peacefully. Write letters. Call your members of Congress. Don't do anything illegal. Don't be menacing. Don't be violent. Anger is good because if you're not angry, you're depressed. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. You don't need to be violent. You don't need to be a criminal. You don't need to break the law. You need to be angry and use your First Amendment rights. This is, according to the polling, about to become the most unpopular war in modern American history. It is closing in. It's even with Vietnam right now, which is amazing. This is, I got to give the American people credit because I beat up, I believe in collective guilt. And I say, he did get elected. But new polling from the Washington Post says this is the most unpopular war in American history. And it's getting, right now, it says unpopular as Vietnam. But here's the thing about that. It took until 1971 for Vietnam to hit the 61% disapproval rating. This country was divided in the 60s over Vietnam. It's why Nixon won in 68. It's why he was able to continue the war until 73. This country wasn't like, hey, McGovern got wiped out in 72 when he ran for president, promising to bring the troops home. Vietnam, despite being one of the worst things this country ever did, was more popular than it deserved, and it took until 1971 for it to hit a 61% disapproval rating. And we had been in Vietnam, 54 is when we started sending in advisors. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution, 64? The escalation begins in 65. So let's say 1965, Johnson sent in about 500,000 troops in 65. 6 years later, 1971, it took 6 years for Vietnam to hit the 61% disapproval rating. Trump's war in Iran is at 61% disapproval in fewer than 2 months, and it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse because life is getting worse. Life is getting unaffordable. The American people know this is stupid, that it's a disaster, and it's making us less safe. 61% of Americans tell the Washington Post that Trump's war makes us more vulnerable to a terrorist attack on U.S. soldiers and U.S. soil. Meanwhile, 60% say they're expecting a recession, while nearly a quarter of Americans, 25% of Americans, say since this war began, they have fallen behind financially. Well, the war began on February 28th. And you see what's happening with prices. You see. And thanks to the Republicans getting rid of the Biden-era Obamacare subsidies, those expired on December 31st, 2025, at least 15% of Americans now don't have health care, don't have health insurance. And the last reporting on this that I saw, and that was around the time that the war started, 40% of Americans said that they don't expect to have health. 40% of Americans who are on Obamacare said they don't expect to have health insurance by the end of the year. That was, right around the time the war was starting, before the price of oil doubled. So Hegseth, unable to give a figure before Congress or during his press briefings to how much this war has or will cost. The Pentagon puts it at $25 billion. They say, so far it's only cost us only $25 billion. But the people inside the Pentagon who are cutting the checks, they are leaking quietly that it cost so far $2 billion a day, and it came to about $50 billion. We burned through about $50 billion during the war, which, Trump says he's not happy with Iran's offer. So we have to look at it again. I don't think they've suffered enough. We're going to escort some ships through Hormuz. Trump says the war is going great. He says we won and it's not a war. He says it's a war, but we won it, but there's nothing to win because it's not a war. He said prices have come down except for the price of oil, which of course causes everything else to spike. But he says, and Hegseth said this during testimony, you have to blame Joe Biden for the high prices, not the war, because he said, we have plenty of oil. Huh? Yeah, we have plenty of oil, but it's sold on the international market. So if prices go up internationally, we pay more. It's all Biden's fault. And, said Hegseth during his testimony, if you complain about prices, you hate our troops and our country, and you should be hanged for treason. He didn't say you should be hanged for treason, but he said, shame on you complaining, bringing money. When people ask him, how much is this war going to cost? Shame on you, dishonoring the troops, bringing up money at a time like this. He dismisses domestic issues. How much are you willing to pay to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon, he kept saying. I'm going to wait, I'm going to get to this, and it's going to blow your mind when I puncture that lie. The fact is, Hegseth likes war. Trump likes war. During his speech Friday, Trump told the audience, next stop, Cuba. He said, I'm thinking of invading Cuba. He said, we have to save the Cuban people because they're living in a failed state. How about you invade America and save us first? He said, he bragged, all I have to do is dock the USS Abraham Lincoln 100 yards off the coast to Cuba, and the Cuban people will say, thank you very much, and they will give up. You know what I think? Some of the Marines and sailors on the USS Abraham Lincoln will jump ship and move to Cuba because they're starving on board the USS Abraham Lincoln. I showed you the reporting from USA Today. They're being fed what amounts to dog food once a day. That's how much Hegseth loves our troops. He's feeding them essentially dog food. Meanwhile, Trump has talked seriously about invading Cuba and installing Marco Rubio as Cuba's viceroy. Rubio's family escaped Cuba after Castro took over, and Rubio is very busy these days. He's Secretary of State, he's National Security Advisor, and he's in charge of U.S. aid. Well, in charge of gutting it, destroying it. He's effectively cut food and medicine to impoverished nations by half. In 1 year, he's caused the death, by some estimates, of at least 1 million people globally, just in 1 year. So you would think he would feel bad about this. Nah, he had 2 turntables and a microphone down in Miami DJing a wedding. This is Marco Rubio DJing a wedding in Miami Saturday night. Marco Rubio spent so much time on his knees debasing himself in front of Donald Trump. Marco spins records under the name DJ BJ, because I'm pretty sure DJ BJ has been performing many BJs on Donald Trump. Look at that. That is Marco Rubio. We got a war, a failing war in Iran, food prices, gas prices, sub-Saharan Asia, more famine. He's cutting U.S. aid. Doesn't matter. Saturday night, he's pumping his fists while playing Shiver, I think is the song, by John Summit and Hala. That's Marco Rubio living his best life while the rest of us live our worst. Not a care in the world for Marco Rubio. 1 million dead because of Marco Rubio's cuts to U.S. aid. Millions more to die because of his cuts to U.S. aid. And there's Marco Rubio celebrating what? What are you celebrating? The video of DJ BJ, that would be Marco Rubio. He's the DJ with the BJ. DC, by the way, Howie Klein talked, I forgot about DJ BJ and his white teeth before he became a lawyer. Google that about DJ BJ. Look up Marco Rubio, white teeth, and his arrest in a park in Florida. And the great Howie Klein, a day doesn't go by that I don't think about Howie. And he talked about DJ BJ's exceptionally white teeth after getting arrested in a park in Florida. Look it up. Anyway, that video of DJ BJ, that would be Marco Rubio. He's DJ BJ, he with the incredibly white teeth. And I won't tell you how he whitened them, but it was apparently in a park before he got arrested. That video of DJ BJ was put up online by White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, who invited Marco Rubio to this wedding Saturday night. Now, we don't know where it was in Miami or who in Dan Scavino's family was getting married, because as this clip of Marco Rubio DJing a wedding clearly indicates, we are a nation at war and security must be tight. The enemy cannot know where Dan Scavino's family member got married in Miami, and we're at war. The enemy can't know that DJ BJ has 2 turntables and a microphone. Well, that's Dan Scavino. Let's take a good look at this winner. Huh? Happy man. That I didn't alter that. I will confess when I alter a picture. That is what Dan Scavino. That's a good day for Dan Scavino. And he used to be Trump's caddy. He worked his way up in Trump world to social media guru in the Trump campaign. And because he's so good at social media, he's Deputy White House Chief of Staff. Now, this is now the second media failure for Dan Scavino in 1 week. This is his second social media failure in 1 week. So Saturday, he posted video of DJ BJ, Marco Rubio, the man with the BJs, and the exceptionally white teeth in a park that nobody can explain. Google that. So he posted the video of Marco Rubio DJing while Rome burned. This, I'm going to show you, was last Saturday night, right after the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Dan Scavino, Trump's social media guru and Deputy White House Chief of Staff, posted this just minutes after the shooting. Listen.
God bless America!
That's Dan Scavino right after the shooting going, God bless America and USA, USA, and everybody hiding under their banquet tables. Somehow didn't join Dan Scavino in a chant of USA and God bless America. Yeah, it was the third assassination attempt against Donald Trump in fewer than 2 years. For some reason, people didn't feel like it was the right time to celebrate jingoism, USA, USA. It's the people who shout USA, USA after a shooting, they're the reason we have so many shootings. They're the ones who think, hey, good guy with a gun. All we need is a good guy with a gun. Well, we're about to find something out this week about who actually shot that Secret Service agent. I can't say for certain, but there is a distinct possibility that we may find out that the Secret Service agent who survived, thank God, was shot by friendly fire. From what I'm hearing, and this may not be true, but the ballistic tests are in, and there is some talk that the good guy with a gun was shot by another good guy with a gun, and that's going to blow holes into the hole. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, because if this Secret Service agent was shot by a trained sharpshooter, marksman, I mean, Trump only the best surround Donald Trump. If a Secret Service agent got hit by friendly fire and not coal, what does that tell you about the problem with guns in our country? That when there's somebody with a gun in the fog of war, people don't know where to aim. But give a gun to Mr. Bennett, the nearsighted music teacher in your kid's elementary school. He'll protect, give him a Glock, and he'll protect everybody from somebody with an AR-15. Got to sell more guns. USA, USA. Let's watch that again, shall we? This is just only country in the world after a shooting when somebody like Dan Scavino would call this a time for patriotism.
God bless America!
Now, making fun of people for saying God bless America and USA, I'm unpatriotic. That's what they're going to say. No, you're unpatriotic. You don't care that close to 60,000 Americans die every year from guns. You don't care that you rather see record profits for the multi-billion-dollar arms industry selling to domestic people, American, not the military, just consumers, multi-billion-dollar. You love America so much that you're willing to allow 55,000, 60,000 Americans to die every year from guns. Yeah, you really love this country. You're so patriotic. Dan Scavino. Well, more lies coming out of the White House, right? While Rubio and Scavino were parting, travelers in the United States were stranded after Spirit Airlines went out of business. 35 years, Spirit Airlines out of business. Trump hinted that he might buy, well, not he, but the government might buy Spirit, but at the last minute, he said no. I kind of like the idea, though, of nationalizing. I mean, he's onto. I'm being serious. He's onto something. Congressman Alan Grayson talked about this a couple of years ago on this show. Instead of bailing out these companies, just nationalize them. Why, we bailed out GM. We bail out banks. We should own them. Little socialism, little state-owned business. Nothing wrong with that. Little hybrid economy. Have socialism competing with capitalism. Let's see who can do better. And you know what? Trump people will say, well, that's unfair because big business can't compete with the government. The post office used to do banking for the unbanked. I think like 1/3 of this country is unbanked. Well, the post office, the evil, incompetent post office, you used to be able to do your banking at the post office, and the bank said, that's not fair. We can't compete with the post office. So they passed laws forbidding the post office from letting you do your banking there. See, the big business, they love telling you that the government is totally incompetent. Meanwhile, they're sucking off the teat of our government, which is about 40% of our economy. And they lie and say it's run by fools and we Doja and we got to clean up. But God forbid the government own an airline. Big business, we can't compete with the government. Of course you can't compete with the government. You can't compete with Medicare. Can't compete with the VA. VA's better than United Healthcare. That's why United Healthcare is a cancer inside the VA. So Trump said, maybe I'll buy Spirit, or use your tax dollars to buy Spirit. Changed his mind, couldn't get it done. And now 17,000 people who work for Spirit are out of work. This is Sunday night. We've got Americans stranded at airports because Spirit went belly up. Well, why did Spirit go belly up? You know why. It's the same reason Lufthansa in Germany is having so much trouble. It's why airlines around the world are turning to their governments for bailouts. The jet fuel. And why is jet fuel going up? Because Donald Trump knew better and started bombing Iran, and they did the thinkable. They closed Hormuz. And now that they're offering Sunday night to reopen Hormuz for 30 days so we can begin negotiating, Donald Trump says, nah, you guys haven't suffered enough. The blockade is on, and I'm going to start escorting ships through Hormuz. We'll see if he does that. We'll see if it should be going on right now, supposedly. So that's why Spirit went belly up. Cost of gas or jet fuel. On Saturday, Trump's transportation secretary, Sean Duffy from MTV's The Real World, this douchebag, well, he had the talking points. He's our transportation secretary. Here is douchebag transportation secretary Sean Duffy at Newark's Liberty Airport Saturday lying, saying, do not blame the war. Do not blame the blockade of Hormuz on Spirit going belly up. Do not blame fuel costs. It's whose fault? Joe Biden's. I'm going to play you the clip. He says it's Joe Biden's fault and my predecessor, Pete Buttigieg's fault. Pete Buttigieg was Biden's transportation secretary. I'm not a big fan of Pete Buttigieg, but he was a pretty brilliant transportation secretary. Pretty great. And, you know, he's a young guy and he kind of grew into the job. I think he's opportunistic and he's not for Medicare for all. And he's, you know, McKinsey and Harvard, and his heart is not with the 99%. That being said, he learned how the government works and he was able to fix things. Sean Duffy from MTV's The Real World, all he knows how to do is repeat talking points. Here he is blaming Joe Biden and Marco Rubio for Spirit Airlines going under.
But I think it's important to talk about why are we here today. There was a proposed merger between JetBlue and Spirit. And Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, along with the Biden DOJ, decided that they did not want that merger to take place.
That's why Spirit went under, because Biden was against monopolies. Biden wanted travelers to have more choice. So Spirit would still be in business. No, it would be owned by JetBlue. So it wouldn't be in business. And how's JetBlue doing with jet fuel doubling since the war? It's never our fault. They have Trump and his attack machine. They're working overtime. Anything, everything is Biden's fault and the Democrats' fault. They are experts at this. Sean Hannity, during George W. Bush administration, blamed the financial crisis on black people buying homes. That was the talking point. It wasn't deregulation. It wasn't unregulated capitalism. Black people wanted to buy homes. People who couldn't afford homes getting in over their heads. Right. And, again, you just keep repeating this, and there are enough people who believe it. And they, Marco Rubio DJing a party, unable to negotiate peace with Iran, right? People say, hey, it's not his fault, not Marco Rubio's fault that 1 million people died in the past year because of his cuts to U.S. aid. Rubio is DJing. Spirit Airlines is going up while Americans are choosing between food, rent, their car payments. The White House defending Rubio, saying, can't he relax and celebrate? Absolutely, when you have a reason to celebrate. You have to deserve a celebration. These are the same people who complain about millennials getting trophies, right? Everybody gets a trophy. Well, everybody in the White House gets a trophy. You get a trophy. Millions of people are about to starve in the sub-Saharan and in Asia and in this country because Marco Rubio, who is Secretary of State, he's supposed to bring peace, not war. That's the job of a Secretary of State, to bring peace. Instead, he brought us war, but give him a trophy anyway. Give him a trophy. Meanwhile, Trump, speaking at the Villages on Friday night, that's the retirement home in Florida where he belongs, he said his wife, Melania, hates the Village people, he said. She said, Melania hates me when I come out dancing to YMCA. Yeah, that's the only time she hates you, because you're dancing to YMCA. She doesn't hate you for any other reason, not because you had unprotected sex with a porn star just weeks after she gave you a son. She hates you because of the way you dance to YMCA. Trump speaking at the Villages, saying his wife hates the Village people. Somebody should do a sketch called The Villages People, where it's just a bunch of old people in Florida dressed like the Village people. Somebody should do that and be yelled at for doing it because it's not clever, it's not funny. Yeah, Melania hates you because you dance to YMCA. Everybody hates you, Donald Trump. Everybody. Gas prices spiked 30 cents just this week. We just saw Spirit go out of business because of jet fuel, but it's Biden's fault. 20 million barrels of oil that are supposed to go through Hormuz each day are sitting there in the Persian Gulf, and supposedly, how many billions of dollars a day are you going to supposedly spend starting on Monday escorting, using our military to be Exxon's security guard to protect Exxon's crude oil? How many billions are you willing to spend to protect oil when we could be building more wind farms? But instead, Trump is paying Total, the French energy company, $1 billion to stop building wind farms, and several other. There's an energy company in New York, another company in California, a couple $100 million of your tax dollars. Last week, we paid for them to stop building wind farms, so we have no alternative but fighting wars for oil in the Persian Gulf. Yeah, but Trump and Marco Rubio says everybody dance now. He's defending YMCA because he can't defend his administration. Marco Rubio is spinning records on the dance floor. I've said this before. Nero fiddled while Rome burned, but at least he knew how to play the fiddle. Trump can't dance, and Rubio can't do anything. How many jobs does this guy need? The worse Marco Rubio does, the more responsibility Trump gives him. As I said at the top of the show, we're 4 days past the sell date for a congressional authorization for this war. He's got to sell this war to Congress. The war has to stop after 60 days. If there's no congressional approval, the war stops. That's why Trump said, and I'm going to play it again.
We're doing what they call a military operation. You know, they don't like the word war, and they call it a military operation because that way you don't have a war, you don't have legal problems.
You'll always have legal problems, Donald Trump, especially if and when you ever leave the White House. You're going to spend the rest of your pathetic life fighting off criminal indictments and civil lawsuits for the rest of your sad, pathetic life. Well, Hegseth is saying there's a ceasefire, so the clock on the War Powers Act is stopped. Well, what about the blockade? Trump says, well, it's a peaceful blockade. Really? Because you were just bragging about seizing the Tuska and firing shots into the engine room. Is it still going to be a peaceful blockade starting Monday if you keep your promise and start escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz? You're putting soldiers, if you start escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, you need a war authorization. You are putting troops in harm's way. The excuse that they always give for not needing a war authorization with these illegal airstrikes on quote-unquote narco-terrorists, they always say, well, we don't need a war authorization for that because we're not putting troops in harm's way. It's drones. It's death from above. You're going to put battleships, missile-guided destroyers, minesweepers through the Strait of Hormuz, putting soldiers in harm's way, and you think you can do that without a congressional approval? What country do you think this is? Oh, right, you can do it because Congress is on vacation. The Trump administration launched the war in Iran without seeking congressional approval. They gave the 48-hour notification to the Gang of Eight before and after. But the 60-day mark under the War Powers Resolution, it was up on May 1st. And like I said, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and other members of the Trump White House are insisting, no, that 60-day clock stopped for the ceasefire. By law, the president must notify Congress within 48 hours of his sending troops or bombing another country. He must explain why and justify it. Well, he did give his official 48-hour notification on March 2nd. By then, 6 soldiers were dead in Kuwait. And again, if 60 days are up and there's no war authorization, Trump has to stop the war. If Congress doesn't pass the war authorization, Trump can ask for 30 more days, but that's only to withdraw our troops safely. So you get 60 days to fight your war, and then without an authorization, you have 30 days to end it. That's the law, but nobody's obeying it. So Trump, of course, calls the War Powers Law, quote, totally unconstitutional. Suddenly he's worried about what's constitutional. He said, nobody's ever sought congressional authorization to go to war. Right. Afghanistan, no war authorization. Iraq, there was a war authorization. Bush and Cheney and Colin Powell lied, but Congress passed a war authorization. They authorized use of force. The one with Afghanistan is still in effect, which is why you're able to bomb narco-terrorists and attack Venezuela. That was your legal justification. It was the war authorization to fight a global war on terror that Congress passed in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and they keep renewing it, and presidents keep using this vague term, a war on global terrorism, to justify airstrikes. Obama killed an American citizen using that war authorization. So that was a lie. That's the lie, that nobody ever needed a war authorization from Congress to go to war. The Constitution, by the way, says only Congress can declare war. The White House claimed then, hey, the war is over. We have a ceasefire. There's no war, and we won it. It was never a war. It was an excursion or a military operation, but we won the war. Trump sent a letter to Congress telling them, I won't be asking for a war authorization. He sent this the night before May 1st, saying there's no need for a war authorization because hostilities between the United States and Iran have been terminated. Great. So end the blockade and don't escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Under the War Powers Act, you have to send that letter to the Speaker of the House and the Senate President pro tem, Chuck Grassley. That's according to the War Powers Act. And there are some Republicans who want to push a vote on a war authorization. John Curtis is the Utah senator. I think he has Mitt Romney's seat. He has gone on record for at least a month saying he would oppose funding for the war unless there's an authorization. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who's got a tough reelection campaign coming up in November, she said she would vote with the Democrats to remove forces from Iran. And she said the 60 days deadline in the War Powers Act is not a suggestion, it's a requirement. Then there's Lisa Murkowski, the Republican from Alaska. She is also demanding a vote on a war authorization to find out what we're doing. Like, explain to us what this war is about. Now, Pete Hegseth said, we never asked for $200 billion for a war supplemental. That is partly true. I looked into it. They have not officially asked for the money to pay for the war in Iran. They've told Congress they're going to need $200 billion. They just haven't put it into writing. So the War Powers Act has never been used to end a military action. And most presidents, since the War Powers Act was signed in 1973, have been against it. In fact, Richard Nixon vetoed the War Powers Resolution when it was passed in 1973, but his veto was overridden by Congress. The courts have not really ruled on the War Powers Act. There haven't been too many lawsuits challenging the use of force. And we've seen that presidents after the War Powers Act, have been creative, finding workarounds. And you don't need a war authorization all the time. You can ask Congress for permission. Obama kept bombing Libya past 60 days. He didn't have congressional approval. He used the excuse that Trump is using and Hegseth is using for bombing narco-terrorists. They said, well, we can keep bombing Libya past 60 days because U.S. soldiers are not in harm's way. And Bill Clinton kept troops in Kosovo past 60 days in 1999. He said it wasn't a violation of the War Powers Act because Congress authorized money to mobilize the troops, so that was implicit approval. Well, these are workarounds. There's been, by the way, you're listening to The Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for finding me. There's been some solid reporting in Atlantic Magazine about J.D. Vance trying to walk a tightrope as he prepares his run for 2028. Vance, according to the New York Times, we've talked about this, Vance was against the war in Iran, as was everybody in the White House except Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. Vance said, I will support you, Mr. President, no matter what. But I'm against this. I think it's a bad idea. He was against it. It's why Vance was not seen in the Situation Room at Mar-a-Lago the night the strikes began on February 28th. Vance, J.D. Vance, came to prominence politically as a MAGA supporter. He is against these forever wars. Meanwhile, he's been given the unenviable task of negotiating peace with Iran. Trump gave him that job because it's doomed to failure, because Trump is running in 2028 as well. He doesn't want Vance taking credit for the war in Iran or taking credit for peace in Iran. And Vance can't make a deal with the Iranians because Trump won't accept anything that's worse than the 2015 deal that Obama had with Iran. Problem for Vance, problem for Trump, Witkoff, Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner should be in prison. Problem is Trump can't get that deal. Iran holds all the cards. I've been saying that for weeks. I saw it. Where did I see it? I saw somebody say, anyway. Vice President J.D. Vance, according to Atlantic Magazine, has been privately questioning Pete Hegseth. There's a lot of tension between Hegseth and J.D. Vance, according to this article in Atlantic. There's been other reporting on this. J.D. Vance says, I need proof that backs up your optimistic depiction of how this war is going. And Vance has openly said, at least in meetings, that we're running low on crucial weapons. Again, I mentioned that 2024, he said we don't have the industrial base to provide weapons to Ukraine. That's what J.D. Vance said while running for vice president. So J.D. Vance is warning that if we're at 50%, if 50% of our precision-guided missiles have been depleted, 40% of our Patriots, 40% of our THAAD missile systems, what are we going to do to defend Taiwan, South Korea, and Europe? But I don't think he cares about Europe. We know that Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, warned Trump, we don't have enough munitions, but Dan Kane is now saying, oh, we've got plenty of stockpiles. But we know that we're running out while intelligence estimates American intelligence estimates, as well as Israeli intelligence estimates, say that Iran could have retained so far 2/3 of its air force, despite all the strikes. Now, Hegseth lies and says we wiped out 90% of their air force, and the Artesh is their army. Well, the army in Iran isn't as powerful as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The Revolutionary Guard is kind of like the SS, the Gestapo, the Proud Boys. They're the Palace Guard. They get all the good weapons. They're the real muscle in Iran. And from what we're being told, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard hasn't been touched. They're hiding the bulk of their missile launching capability in caves, man-made caves carved into the sides of mountains. They've got small, fast boats. And we've seen that. We saw what happened when that jet fighter, I think it was an F-15, got shot down over Iran. We saw the Warthog get shot down. We saw 2 Black Hawk helicopters almost get shot down. They had to retreat. You can keep telling us, Pete Hegseth, that you've destroyed Iran's military. Facts don't bear that out. They were firing 16 to 17 drones and ballistic missiles a day up until the ceasefire. So there's a lot of tension inside the White House between J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump, because J.D. Vance is Trump's natural enemy. He's the vice president. And Trump has acknowledged openly that J.D. Vance was, quote, maybe less enthusiastic about this war. Well, the entire White House told you not to do it. The entire world told you not to do it. Hegseth, the only person who was for the war, is solidifying power inside the Trump administration. He has successfully curried favor with Donald Trump. Trump seems to favor Hegseth over Rubio and Vance. Why? Because Hegseth has no political ambitions. Hegseth is arrogant and stupid and drunk, but he knows nobody would ever elect him president. Then again, that's what they said about Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump. I remember as a kid, my father said, nobody's going to trust me on this. There are a lot of stupid people in this country, son, but they're not that stupid. They're not going to elect Ronald Reagan president. I can assure you that. And I remember on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour in 2015, when Donald Trump came down the escalator, Ralph Nader said, he's got a really good chance of winning this. Go listen. Go look up. There are transcripts of every episode of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Go listen to what Ralph Nader said in 2015. He said, never underestimate the American voter's susceptibility to a carnival barker. That's what Ralph Nader said. And I went, come on. That's not true. Come on, it's a joke. Ralph said, you'll see. You'll see. So there is a rivalry between Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance. Both men served in our military. Vance served in the Marines. He enlisted, but he never saw combat. He was behind the green zone. Hegseth served in the National Guard. He did see action. And obviously, I'm not making a joke here, he has untreated PTSD and should get it treated. Vance does not want to be saddled with this war. He doesn't want to be like Hubert Humphrey in 1968. He's going to try to make a go of it in Iowa. Meanwhile, war or no war, he remains the most unpopular vice president in modern American history. That's according to the polling. Everybody hates J.D. Vance. That's why Trump picked him. Trump picked J.D. Vance because he's even more detestable in many ways than Donald Trump. At least Donald Trump is funny. At least we're laughing as we fall into the abyss. So, like everything with Donald Trump, the war is a mess. Congress, by law, has to authorize this. Both chambers out for 10 more days. So Trump gets to run American foreign policy with zero oversight. He just announced he's yanking 5,000 troops from Germany, all because the chancellor, Fred Mertz, stated the obvious that Iran is humiliating Trump. Trump says he's pulling 5,000 troops from Germany, and he says he's going to pull all 35,000 out eventually. Why? Because Fred Mertz told a group of school children on last Monday that Iran is humiliating Trump in the United States. And Congress is gone. The troops are expected to leave Germany in the next 6 to 12 months. Both Republican chairmen of the House and Senate Armed Services Committee saying they will try to stop Trump from doing this, but he is the commander-in-chief. Trump then saying he's not happy with Italy or Spain, and he's thinking of pulling American troops out of those countries. Well, he wants to get out of NATO. He says they haven't been helpful since the war started. In fact, they were very helpful. They told you don't do it, but you did it anyway. And now you've been threatening to pull out of NATO since your first administration. Now you're actually ordering 5,000 troops out of Germany. I wonder who that benefits. Vladimir Putin, that's who it benefits. Congress, gone for 10 days. So Marco Rubio bypassed congressional authorization, and I love this. He allowed $8 billion in arms sales last week to Israel, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar without congressional approval. You need congressional authorization to sell weapons. Rubio said, I had to bypass Congress to make this $8 billion in sales to help our allies replenish because they need more interceptors. He said they need about 12,000 bombs. But our military, we have to run on fumes. What are we down? What we got 50% depletion of our Patriot interceptors, 45% depletion of our precision strike missiles. I know we're down to like 30. We've burned out 30% of our Tomahawks, 50% of our THAAD missile systems. So, of course, you had to approve an $8 billion arms sale to Israel, Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar, bypassing congressional authorization in violation of the law. Of course, you had to go around Congress because they never would have approved that, especially since we're running on fumes. Well, as I said at the top of the show, Pakistan delivered a 14-point peace plan to the president over the weekend. Kind of vague what's in it. Iran said the terms for peace must include the war on Iran, as well as Israel's war in Lebanon ending. Iran is also demanding that all its foreign assets be unfrozen and the United States lift economic sanctions. The Islamic Republic is demanding that the United States also pay reparations for the war and the bombing that it started. And Iran is demanding that the United States remove all military bases that border Iran and are in the Persian Gulf. They want all military bases removed from the Persian Gulf. Well, as I said earlier in the show, they've destroyed about 16 military bases in 8 countries in the Persian Gulf. It's going to cost us billions of dollars. So The reporting on this is somewhat cloudy because it's Trump. So we don't know exactly what kind of peace offering came over the weekend, especially when it comes to Hormuz. There is some reporting, but we're not sure. I triple and quadruple check. So there is some reporting that Iran said to the United States, we will open Hormuz for 30 days if America, that would be Donald Trump, would end the naval blockade and actually sit down at the bargaining table and come up with a peace agreement. They said, we'll settle the nuclear weapons thing. That's the big thing. Iran can't have nuclear weapons. Well, we'll talk about that. And to show you, as an act of good faith, we'll open up Hormuz if you end the blockade and sit down at the table. That's one of the reports that's coming in, that Iran is telling Trump, let's get Hormuz open, then we can discuss our nuclear enrichment program. And Iran, there are reports that Iran has agreed, but this may be coming from Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, that Iran has agreed to give up all its nuclear enrichment programs for 5 years, 15 years, 20 years. So it's not just giving up the nuclear weapons program that they never had. Iran is now, according to some reporting, Iran has said we can put on the table our giving up all nuclear enrichment. But if you read its peace plan that it offered, 14 points, Iran said, we will agree to enrich uranium in accordance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that Iran, along with 190 other nations, signed back in 1970, where they all agreed to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes and not to develop nuclear weapons. Okay, so it's deep in the show. If you're still watching, I don't know if anybody's still here, I'm going to explain some things here. They want you afraid that Iran's going to get a nuclear weapon. Fox News trashed the deal that Obama made with Iran in 2015. It was a perfect deal. That's why the EU signed it. That's why Germany, France, Great Britain, the entire EU, Russia, China, they all signed it. It was a perfect deal. But anything Obama does can't be good. That deal is rooted in the nuclear non-proliferation. If you stick with me on this, I promise you will see why the deal that Obama struck was perfect and why Trump is just lying. He just wants a war. He doesn't know what he wants. But let me explain to you what the law and the treaties are, okay? The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed back in 1970. 190 countries signed it, including Iran. And they all agreed to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, not to develop nuclear weapons. Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, 1970. And that was the basis of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, that they would be allowed to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. 2% purity, 3% purity. They got up to 60%. Why? Because Trump pulled out of this deal. Okay. Again, this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is the pillar upon which Iran states it is legally permitted to enrich uranium for what? Medical, industrial, or energy uses. Countries all over the world have nuclear power plants, which I'm not thrilled about, but they enrich uranium for other things without making it weapons grade. It's important to know this. And it's a little deep in the weeds, so I thought, all right, save it to the last, you're 8 hours into the show, David, if anybody's still listening after 8 hours. But this is the important stuff. This is really important. There are 9 countries on this planet that have nuclear weapons. And you got to pay attention to this, because if you know this, you will know how evil Donald Trump and the Republicans are, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay? There are 9 countries on the planet that have nuclear weapons, and there they are. Okay? Before the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1970, the United States, China, Russia, France, and Great Britain were the only countries that had nuclear bombs. And Israel. Israel got a nuclear bomb in 1967, but diplomatically, they never introduced themselves as a nuclear power. You have to introduce yourself and declare yourself a nuclear power. Israel never did that. So it's not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It was one of the countries that didn't sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970. Now, I want you to think about this, okay? And this is the core of what it's all about. And if you understand this, you understand everything. The entire world knows Israel has a nuclear bomb. And the latest premise for the war on Iran is the same premise it was for the war with Iraq. We cannot allow a rogue nation to develop a nuclear bomb. That's one of the chief reasons, one of the chief lies that led us into the war in Iraq and now the war in Iran. You keep hearing it over and over again. We cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And now I'm going to explain to you why this is so stupid. Forget that Iran abandoned their nuclear weapons program in 2003. Forget that our own intelligence agencies have been telling that to Trump since he returned to office. Okay? Iran is legally permitted to enrich uranium. Countries that they signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement, I think 160, 190 countries signed. You sign that treaty, and you're allowed to enrich uranium, 2% purity, 3% purity. Does Iran enrich to 60%? Is it enriching uranium closer to weapons grade than any other country that is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? We believe so. Grossi, the UN inspector, who I trust, believes so. Why do they do that? It's to make Iran look more threatening on the world stage when it comes to their military, what they can do to protect themselves. But we've since learned they don't need nuclear weapons. They can just shut down Hormuz. So the lie, and I want you to think about this, the lie that Donald Trump is hammering home to the American people is, be scared. We cannot allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. Same thing with Iraq, 2003, and the lead up to that illegal war. Cannot allow Saddam Hussein to have a nuclear weapon. Pete Hegseth constantly, throughout his testimony last week, dodged questions on what the war would cost by rhetorically asking, how much are you willing to pay to keep a nuclear weapon out of the hands of Iran? And it's a frightening, it sounds good if you don't follow this stuff. If you don't understand nuclear weapons, which I don't, if you don't understand nuclear war, which I don't, if you don't understand geography, which I don't, I know most Americans don't, then you're easily scared. You're easily convinced that the most dangerous thing on the planet is Iran, or in 2003, Iraq getting a nuclear weapon. And what is the foundation of this lie? Where do they get this from? It's predicated on all of us thinking about North Korea. That's the backbone of this lie, that North Korea got hands on a nuclear weapon and now it became uninvadable. That's the lie, that once a country gets a nuclear bomb, you cannot invade it. North Korea became a nuclear power in 2006. It had been a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but it pulled out in 2003 and then publicly introduced itself as a nuclear power. They said, we have a nuclear weapon in 2006. And the Trump administration and Netanyahu said, see, we allowed them to get a nuclear weapon, and that makes North Korea attack-proof. They can do whatever they want now, and there's nothing we can do about it because they have a nuclear bomb. And people believe that. People have now been convinced, because if you repeat the lie, Netanyahu stood at the General Assembly with maps. If you repeat this lie, people believe it. Once a country has a nuclear bomb, they never have to worry about getting attacked. So we fight wars to make sure they don't get a nuclear bomb. Well, because of that lie, Iran enriched uranium to 60%. You need, what does it have to be, 98% purity for it to be weapons grade? They were bringing it up to about 60%. Why did they do that? For the same reason Saddam Hussein, in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq in 2003, he messed with UN weapons inspector. He didn't have a nuclear weapons program. He didn't have the scientists that Iran has. But he wanted people to believe he did, especially Iran. Saddam Hussein wanted Iran to think he had a nuclear weapons program because Iran and Iraq engaged in one of the longest and deadliest wars of the 20th century. It was between 1980 and 1988. It was one of the bloodiest wars. Anywhere between 500,000 to 1 million people died. We were giving weapons to Iraq. And that war ended the way all wars end, in a stalemate, with close to 1 million people dead and nothing accomplished. That's how all wars end, except World War II, and maybe the Civil War. But looks like with the Supreme Court's latest ruling, that Civil War might have been a stalemate. So Saddam Hussein, leader of Iraq, led that country throughout that entire war. He started that war. He wanted Iran, he wanted Israel, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait to think he was not to be messed with. So he messed with the UN inspectors. In the lead up to the illegal invasion of Iraq, which was in 2003, he wanted George Bush not to be certain what Saddam Hussein had. So our soldiers were fitted with hazmat suits when they went in. We didn't know what he was holding. Well, that's the deterrent of either having a nuclear bomb or making people think you have one. But it didn't stop George Bush from invading Iraq. George Bush lied and said Hussein had either a nuclear bomb or weapons of mass destruction. And he knew he was lying, but he wasn't sure about the weapons of mass destruction. But he invaded anyway. He said, for those of you who want evidence that Saddam Hussein has a nuclear bomb, I refuse to provide the smoking gun as proof through a mushroom cloud. That's what Bush said. That's what Condi Rice said, that we can't wait for a mushroom cloud to say, see, they have a nuclear bomb. And then all of you are going to say, why didn't we invade? And enough people bought into this, but he didn't have a nuclear bomb. Trump selling the same lie, but with Iran. We can't allow Iran to develop a nuclear bomb because then we can't invade them. That's the lie. Can't invade North Korea. Can't fight Russia. Can't fight China. They have nuclear weapons. Can't fight them. The world would come to an end. That's how these two wars, Iran and Iraq, were sold. Once a country has a nuclear weapon, they become untouchable. Okay. I took a little too long explaining the premise. I apologize. I'm going to poke the holes in it. Here we go. Anybody still here? India and Pakistan are nuclear powers, and they hate each other, thanks to Lord Mountbatten separating Hindus from the Muslims after the war. So India and Pakistan never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 1974, India developed a nuclear weapon. It now has 180 nuclear warheads, we think. Pakistan, its neighbor, they're always fighting over Kashmir, they developed their nuclear weapon in 1998. And Pakistan has slightly fewer nuclear warheads. So, since 1998, since Pakistan became one of the 9 nuclear powers, since it became uninvadable, right? Pakistan has a nuclear bomb. You can't attack it, right? Since 1998, India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers, have fought 3 major wars, mostly over Kashmir. 3 major wars, 2 nuclear powers fighting each other, 3 major wars, and literally tens of thousands of skirmishes over the course of close to 30 years. Both nuclear powers, but they still get to enjoy their wars. Israel has had a nuclear bomb since 1967. Didn't tell anyone, but everyone knew. Israel didn't have to tell anybody it had a nuclear bomb. The world knew. So, Israel has a nuclear bomb. That makes Israel uninvadable, right? Unattackable. Since 1967, Israel has fought at least 8 to 10 major wars. It's also been attacked. It's attacked 10 times about. And then there's stuff that gets ignored. Right now, Israel, a nuclear power, right? Can't attack a country with a nuclear power, with a nuclear bomb. Right now, it's being attacked by Iran, not a nuclear power. It's being attacked by Hezbollah in Lebanon, not a nuclear power. The Houthis in Yemen keep firing missiles into Israel. Houthis in Yemen, not a nuclear power. Hamas keeps attacking Israel. Hamas, not a nuclear power. But what if Hamas in Gaza got their hands on a nuclear weapon? Yes, they would drop it on Jerusalem, and everybody in the West Bank and Gaza would die. If Iran dropped a nuclear bomb on Israel, 20% of Israel, excluding Gaza, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank, 20% of Israel is Arab. A lot of Muslims there. I know the Iranians are Persian, they're not Arabs, but they're Muslim. You drop a bomb on Israel, you're not just going to wipe out all the Jews living there, you're going to wipe out 20% of the population that's Arab. And that radioactivity will spread to the West Bank and wipe out all the Palestinians. It'll spread to Gaza, kill all the Palestinians there. It'll spread north to Lebanon and kill Hezbollah and the Shia Muslims in southern Lebanon. As my daughter said, well, I don't want to quote her. But it's kind of like, well, I won't. It's her line. I don't want to steal it from her. But it's like getting into an elevator with 3 people and detonating a landmine. Yeah, you're going to kill everybody in the elevator, including you. So, yeah, it's a scary world because of nuclear weapons. It would be great if we didn't have nuclear weapons. And yes, there's this fear of a madman like Donald Trump with his hand on the button. But you drop a bomb on Israel, you kill Muslims. How did Israel, having a nuclear bomb, keep it from getting attacked? Being attacked. It's been attacked. Egypt attacked it, knowing they had a bomb. Syria, Jordan, Iran, Lebanon. Some of you are going to say that Israel attacked first. Maybe. That's for discussion. Preemptive, preventative war. The point is, Israel has had a nuclear bomb since 1967, and they were able to fight wars with Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iran, Lebanon, and none of them said, ooh, they've got a nuclear bomb, we better not do this. The United Kingdom has a nuclear bomb. Didn't stop Argentina from seizing the Falklands. And by the way, Trump is now telling Argentina that we would support you if you took back the Falklands because Great Britain isn't helping me in the Persian Gulf. Ukraine gave up all its nuclear weapons after the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine had a lot of nuclear weapons. And one of the deals, they agreed to give up their nuclear weapons because Clinton said, we'll protect you. You don't need nuclear weapons. Ukraine was invaded by Russia in February of 2022. Russia has close to 5,500 nuclear warheads. Ukraine, 0. So, after Ukraine was invaded by Russia, most of us thought, well, since Russia is a nuclear power, Ukraine is only going to try to push Russia back to Russia, just push them out of Ukraine. But since Russia is a nuclear power and nuclear powers are unattackable, Ukraine would never dream of firing drones and missiles into Russia. They're a nuclear power. You can't attack a nuclear power. They have 5,500 nuclear warheads. It makes them impenetrable. So says the lie, the myth. March 11th, 2025, record-breaking drone assault on Moscow by Ukraine. 3 killed, at least 17 injured. 4 airports had to be shut down. Not since World War II has Moscow been attacked. March 14th, that was 2025, March 14th through the 17th of this year, perhaps Ukraine's largest drone attack since the invasion, swarms of drones. Russia claims it shot down 500. It lasted several days. Moscow's airport had to be shut down. Massive disruption. People had to stay inside. I don't believe anybody died. But Moscow is impenetrable. It has more than 5,500 nuclear warheads. Ukraine has 0. You can't attack a country that has 5,500 nuclear warheads. They're impenetrable. Apparently not. In February and March of this year, Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear bomb, somehow fired cruise missiles into Russia, hit defense factories and refineries. Russia has been attacked. Moscow has been attacked multiple times since the invasion by Ukraine. The nuclear weapons that Russia has did not keep Ukraine from attacking Russia the same way our nuclear weapons didn't keep Osama bin Laden from attacking the World Center and our Pentagon. So no, of course I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Of course not. But apparently bombing its nuclear facilities last June and then dropping 13,000 American bombs in about 4 weeks this year, in addition to the thousands of bombs that Israel has been dropping, apparently that's not going to stop Iran from enriching uranium. Well, what do? We're out of bombs. What do you do? Now, again, Iran says it has a right to enrich uranium. It does. It signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives you the right to enrich uranium. And it doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. On July 14th, 2015, in Vienna, Iran signed the Iran nuclear deal. It was signed by the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia, China, and Germany, and the European Union. They all signed it. And the agreement was Iran would abide by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. They signed it. And in return, we unfroze some assets. But Benjamin Netanyahu didn't like that because Iran supports Hezbollah in Lebanon. So he's got to scare the Israelis and the American people, convincing them that Iran must never have a nuclear weapon. Well, they don't. They gave up their nuclear weapons program in 2003, and they signed this Iran nuclear deal in 2015. But then Donald Trump became president. And what did he do? In May of 2018, he became president in January of 2017. In May of 2018, the genius Donald Trump pulls out of the treaty and effectively killed it. He killed the treaty. And by 2019, 1 year after that, Iran began playing games with weapons inspectors. Google this. The deal was signed in 2015. Between 2015 and 2019, Iran was fully compliant with UN inspectors. Trump pulls out of the treaty in 2018. By 2020, Iran starts messing with UN inspectors. Suddenly, Iran says, there's no treaty. What gives you the right to inspect us? Trump killed it. We agreed to snap inspections at the last minute to allow Grassi from the UN in. But there's no treaty. So why should we allow you in? We had agreed. So who turned Iran into a problematic state that's enriching uranium up to 60%? Who did it? Who did it? We had a treaty, we had a deal, we unfroze some of Iran's assets, which Fox News and Trump, why would we do that? They're our mortal enemy. Well, they now are still your mortal enemy, and they closed Hormuz. And there's really nothing you can do to stop them from building a nuclear bomb. There's really, you can't bomb somebody to stop a bomb. So, again, they were compliant with the treaty. They were enriching uranium. They were allowing in inspectors. They were playing some games, but Trump pulls out in 2018. By 2020, Iran says there's no treaty. We don't like the UN inspectors being here. Who caused this? You know, the world is a very complicated place with a lot of nuance, and it's really hard to find a scapegoat, to pin the blame on one country or one person. But I can assure you, all you need to do is look back at recent history, and you would quickly realize that one man is to blame for all of this: Donald Trump. And eventually, America, we're going to be to blame for this. Eventually, you have to start blaming the American people. It's time to start wondering if Trump may not be the stupidest person in America. Maybe Americans are the stupidest people on the planet. That may be the problem, that Americans are the stupidest people on the planet, and we would have to be the stupidest people on the planet. We're going to spend $1.5 trillion next year on the Pentagon, but if we want to fight a war, we also have to spend $200 billion on a war supplemental, and that will only cover a couple of months. And those wars and those enemies, the enemies don't exist. We have to invent them. We have to pull out of a treaty with Iran to get a war going to justify $1.5 trillion on weapons. You would have to be the stupidest people on the planet, America, to go without food, health care, to live with filthy water, a crumbling infrastructure, schools that can't educate, just so you could keep feeding this war machine. You would have to be the stupidest people on the planet to allow this to happen. Well, it's not completely your fault. The polls show that. But he is going to try to steal the midterms. And I told you this was going to happen. He needs confusion. And right now, thanks to the Supreme Court's ruling that gutted Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, there is enough confusion right now. They handed Trump confusion on a silver platter. There's enough confusion right now for Trump to make a convincing case that the new Congress isn't seated on January 3rd, 2027, if Republicans lose the House. So let's prove we're not the stupidest people on the planet. We need a landslide. Now, the polling shows that, but gerrymandering makes polling sometimes irrelevant. You got to get out and fight and protest and work with the Democratic Party. I know you hate Chuck Schumer, you hate Hakeem Jeffries, you hate Nancy, whoever. But you know who's also in the Democratic Party? AOC. You know who caucuses with the Democratic Party? Bernie Sanders, Pramila Jayapal, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Ayanna Pressley. Cori Bush is running again in Missouri. That's also the Democratic Party. So don't cherry pick the worst people in the Democratic Party and say, oh, they're a bunch of corporatists. For every Josh Gottheimer, there's a Elizabeth Warren. So get to work for the Democratic Party. If you don't like it, change it within. Don't get arrested. Don't do anything violent. Don't do anything stupid. Get to work on the midterms. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I promised I wouldn't do a long show. So the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, the gerrymandering, leave a comment. I have material prepared on the Supreme Court ruling, but it's kind of like the last 90 minutes of this show. Do you want me to explain the Supreme Court ruling and gerrymandering and what this means? Leave a comment. I think I did a pretty good job explaining to you why we don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon, but it's not, they wouldn't have one if Donald Trump didn't blow up the treaty. So I think I did a good job explaining that. I can explain the Supreme Court ruling to you. Let me know. It's very dry. A lot of this stuff is dry and confusing. So thank you to Bob and Mila. And thank you to my listeners, especially tonight. We start the show at 6:05. I have a new schedule. I do the show 6:05 p.m. Sunday nights, Tuesday nights, and Thursday nights live. And I'm sticking to the schedule. I think the show has gotten better because of the schedule. And tonight I try to go live at 6:05, and we had technical problems. I needed to do some software updates. That's all it was. I forgot to do some software updates. And the people in the chat room got me through it. So as I said at the top of the show, you are the wings beneath my gonads. Thank you. Really. You stuck around. It took 3 tries to do this, and the people in the chat room got me through it. So thank you. Thank you to Bob and Mila. Thank you to everybody who showed up to Saturday night's watch party. We're dropping a clip every night of the week at exactly 8:30 p.m., except tonight, because we couldn't get the live show up. And then on Saturday night at 8:30 p.m., we do kind of like a watch party. I'm kind of calling it Saturday's Notebook, where I go through the week's news and dig up parts of this show that cover stories that I think got attention but didn't get enough attention. And I like to highlight those stories, give them a second shot in case some of you didn't sit through a 10-hour podcast. So that's what Saturday's Notebook is turning into. It's 8:30 Saturday night. It's not live. It's just a collection of stories that I talked about that I think deserve a little more attention. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for letting me do this, because both my fists would, if you punch something, you end up breaking your fist. I'd have broken fists right now if I couldn't do this show. Don't be depressed. Be angry. Go to work for the Democratic Party. Change the Democratic Party. You can change the country. Subscribe, like, share. Thank you. Next, you will see me again, no matter what. What's tonight? Sunday? You will see me again if you show up live Tuesday, 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and I will do this. I updated the software, so I'll see you then. Thank you.